Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is riot. And before we take a look at the definitions, I just want to remind everyone that this week I'm trying to focus on some verbs that were used a great deal after the attack on the US Capitol last week. This might be a word you've heard used, and I thought it could be helpful for us to have an understanding of it. So now let's take a look at the definitions for this verb. Riot can be used to mean to take part in a violent public disturbance. So if you remember back about 7 months ago, we looked at the verb protest. Now, the thing that distinguishes a protest from a riot is the violence. So people gathering to say they object to something, that's okay. That's a protest. That collection of people doesn't become a riot until they start doing violent things. And we've witnessed many violent actions occurring at the US Capitol on January 6th. A second way to use the verb riot is to mean to behave in an unrestrained way. I would say it's more common to hear the first usage, particularly in the last week, but you might see that usage in other places. You should know that riot is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all we need to do is add ing. As you watched news on January 6th, particularly if you were watching what was happening live, you might have heard people describing that people are rioting, right? So that would be an example of a progressive use. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are just made by adding ed. And since the base verb riot ends in a T sound, our ed is going to make an id sound, rioted. You'll be relieved to know there are no additional meanings or definitions by making phrasal verbs with our verb riot. So that's going to allow us to look at some example sentences in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we'll look at the past perfect and the present perfect. We're using the past perfect generally to note an action that was completed before another action or before a certain point in time. To make the past perfect, what we need to use is the past form of have, which is had, and then we'll use the participle form of the verb. Here's an example of an affirmative sentence. People had rioted and set fires there the night before. So again, we're using the past perfect here to note that something occurred before a particular point in time. If I want to make a past perfect sentence negative, what I need to do is insert not after the had. You might hear native speakers use the contraction form hadn't, and that's what's in my example sentence. Citizens hadn't rioted in Hong Kong. Finally, if I want to make a yes or no question in the past perfect, I'm going to start with had, then I'll have my subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Had people rioted at the Capitol before January 6th? Now, let's take a look at the present perfect. There are a couple different ways, or reasons, I should say, we might use the present perfect. We might use it to describe an action that started in the past and continues into the present. Or we might use it to describe something that occurred at an indefinite point in the past tense. So we might not know exactly when, and it might not matter. If it was a week ago, 15 years ago, etc. Just doesn't matter. To make the present perfect, we're going to use have or has, and then the participle form of the verb. We will use have with the subjects I, you, we, and they, And we'll use has with the subjects he, she, and it. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Supporters of the president have rioted and looted the Capitol. I saw sentences like that sort of in real time, again, on January 6th as this event was in progress. And I recognize the word loot might be new for you. It's kind of a different way to essentially say someone is stealing things or people are stealing things. Now let's take a look at negative sentences in the present perfect. All we need to do here is add not after our have or has. Here's another example. Most of us haven't rioted for no reason. This was a quote I saw from someone who had participated in the activities on January 6th. Finally, if I want to ask a yes or no question, I would start with have or has, then I'll have my subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Have you ever rioted? Now let's take a look at some related words and one phrase that connects to our verb of the day, riot. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. It can have a couple different meanings. We'll look at two today. So riot as a noun could be a violent disturbance of the peace by a crowd of people. So it's really, you're generally not going to hear riot used with just one subject, he or she, or in reference to one person who is doing something violent. Again, there's this implication that there should be a crowd of people doing it. And this noun meaning really ties back nicely to the first definition we looked at of the verb. Here is an example sentence of the noun riot. The president incited a riot. So I'll also note incite was yesterday's verb of the day. So if you'll remember back, this was like urging violent behavior. A second way you might hear riot used as a noun is going to sound totally different and unlike anything we've talked about previously, but could be something that is wildly amusing. So again, this might seem like a funny sort of thing, but let's look at an example sentence and I'll try and explain it better. That new movie is a riot, or you might hear that new movie is a laugh riot. So again, someone is not saying the movie is causing a violent disturbance. I think the idea is someone would be laughing so hard that like physically they feel almost like it's a violent action because they're laughing to excess. Again, kind of a silly thing, but you may encounter this as you read or talk to others. The next noun we're going to take a look at is rioter. And this won't surprise you. This is describing a person who takes part in a violent disturbance. Here is an example of this noun in a sentence. Rioters are being arrested throughout the United States. I'm using present progressive there to describe that this is something that is ongoing. You might be following news reports and hearing that different video, pictures, etc., are being used to identify the people who trespassed, who broke into the U.S. Capitol and caused damage. The last phrase I'm going to talk about is run riot. And this might sound a little funny, but it means to behave in a violent or unrestrained way. And I would say the unrestrained way is perhaps a little more common. So my example sentence might help explain this meaning. I'm not going to let the children run riot in this hotel. So sometimes this phrase, again, is used to describe how children are behaving. Are they being respectful and quiet? Are they running around, pushing things off tables? That is kind of that connection to riot and being perhaps unrestrained or violent. I also want to spend just a moment pointing out some places that you might have encountered some of the verbs. So again, I took some photos of recent headlines from new U.S. Newspapers, and I've tried to circle and highlight here. So one headline was "Rioters Storm Congress." This was in the byline here. After pro-Trump riot disrupts Congress. Another headline was "Rioters Invade." So again, I've chosen this word because I thought it's something you've likely heard or seen, and I hope we won't encounter more headlines like this in the coming weeks. But if we do, I think you'll be prepared to understand what is being described. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.